3, 2.
Добрий вечір.
Good evening and good day to you. I welcome all of you here at another workshop for the educational platform of PQA, which is conducted by the project CA, Transformation Communications Activity. That is the project of the Agency on Development, USAID. My name is Alexander Kleimanov. I'm in the project, the manager of TV and cinema production department. So for the several years in a row, we are conducting this socially important content competition, and we support the production of the content about the socially important topics which are relevant for Ukraine today. And soon we will announce about the fourth competition, so please follow our announcements, subscribe our information resources, not to miss the beginning of the fourth competition of PQA, because I would say all of the producers of audiovisual content who are working in Ukraine can submit their applications for this competition. So for about half of the year, we, within the PQA project, have already launched the educational platform, which offers the workshops for the experts of audiovisual industry in Ukraine. Those workshops are We invite for those workshops the experts from the United States, from Europe, other countries, and today we have a very interesting workshop of social media and entertainment industry in the multimedia era or epoch. As always, the workshop will be introduced by our Hollywood experts, Adam Sigel, Josh Weinstock. The workshop will be very full of information, saturated and rather interesting. I hope that you will hear something useful and note down lots of useful information. Not to take your time, I'm giving the floor to Adam and Josh, who will introduce our today's guest.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hey, Adam.
Hey, Josh. So welcome. We are really excited to have today's talk. It features, here, I'm going to share a screen. Lauren Kozak, who represents a kind of interesting, kind of in a sense, a perfect guest to talk about sort of the relationship between social media and entertainment. Lauren began, or early in her career, was the sort of the digital publicist for and worked for Britney Spears, and went from Britney to working for the LA Times and the Tribune Company. So she's covered, from the sort of the full entertainment side of things to news and information side of media, and really understands and has an awareness around sort of social media in this space that I don't think anyone else has. So that's why we have her today. Hello, Lauren.
Adam, welcome. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Hello. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, and obviously that's a very quick introduction, but you've done so many things, but obviously the Britney of it all is always the fun part, and yay, free, Britney's free. We're all so happy. What I really want to just do is jump right in. And we're, and just for everyone who's listening, who wants, is obviously maybe taking notes, whatever, we're going to go through a full conversation with Lauren. And then for you, we're going to summarize it with a PowerPoint. So a lot of the ideas and words that we're using will be on there. So if you want to just sit back and listen to our conversation, do that. So you're relaxed. And then at the end, you can take notes if that's of interest. All right, Lauren, so let's get started. Really, the first question is really about what do you think about first when you're building a social media strategy for any of your clients?
Sure. So the first thing you should always start with is audience. Really tuning in and understanding who your audience is, who you're talking to, and what they care about, and how they want to feel. So when we look at that audience point, yes, there's absolutely the demographic part of it, but then there's also what hashtags they follow, what other accounts they follow, what other shows and books and authors and musicians and even brands, product brands they're into. Data kind of tells a story of what they want. So you need to start looking at how they behave out in social media, and that's all out there. One thing that I love to tell people to do is interview your audience. Find people who fit your audience and actually talk to them about how they use the internet. The second thing that I really helps is to create a persona. And that should be something really fun for filmmakers because you create characters all the time, but create characters, almost stereotypes out of the different people in your audience. There's usually 3 to 5 for any product. And that is, Mike the millennial, and he listens to this and does this and likes this, or Fiona the fangirl, and they do this and do that, or Peter the parent, right? And you're looking at different characters who would like your show. And it's really important to remember that sometimes your audience on social media is not the audience of the show. For instance, when you're marketing kids stuff like Sesame Street, you're actually marketing to the parents. So you do that with a little bit of humor, a little bit of nostalgia. Kids aren't on Instagram, so you're marketing to their parents. But the whole key of however you go about it is to really get into the mindset of that user and start to think not like an executive, not like a content creator, but think like an audience member.
And that's a little bit like what filmmakers and TV people do in their own way, right? When you're creating content, you're thinking about your audience. Obviously, when you're planning TV shows, executives, and I've seen this in Ukraine, they do analysis of the audience. So it really is just taking that to the web, making sure you're grabbing, seeing how they interact and engage on the web.
Yeah, a good example of that, like in the United States, is that the age 50 is like a cutoff for Instagram usually. So if you're trying to reach people over 50, you go on Facebook. And if you're trying to reach people under 50, you go on Instagram, or even under 30 on TikTok. That isn't the same internationally, but that's just an example of how that split can happen online.
Got it. So let's say Adam and I identified our audience. We were like, all right, we know who our audience is. So in terms of like next steps of developing like a strategy, whether it's a digital film or television project, what do you recommend?
So at that point, it switches a little. It's different for every person and every marketer. You want to find something that inspires you. So I know people who start with brand guidelines. I know people who start with a tagline or a mission statement or a photo. They're like, this is the photo. Some people start with demographic research and like are much more technical about it. For me, I start with emotions. I start with the way that I want people to feel. And I actually list out the emotions that are important for my audience. And I make everything come from there. And I think that that's really resonant with entertainment too, because it's very, very emotional and feeling based. So the way you want people to feel when they're watching your show, it could be the way you want people to feel on social media. And so I really start with that emotions list, but you want to start with something to ground you in, whether it's a photo or a mission statement or emotions, in every other part of the strategy. And every time you work on it, you want to come back to that guiding light.
And when, so let's say, because a lot of times we're dealing directly with the content creators, and in bigger projects, there are marketing teams who probably know a bunch of what you're talking about. But if you're a content creator, what should the mindset be? Can you explain how they should think about social media? Do they start doing it in the planning, the prep period? Do they start doing during production? Do they post during, post during the post? What is the release schedule, and how should they be thinking about social media in their projects?
So wherever you're at, you should have started a month ago. So The first thing is that social media doesn't just come from you. It doesn't just come from the actors. It doesn't come from an intern. It's everybody. And you want to be tapping makeup and costumes and, food service, craft services. Like you could tap anybody in your production to help make content because everybody's perspective behind the scenes is interesting. Actors are interesting. Writers and directors are obviously interesting. And you don't have to have a digital expert because everybody can make content together. In terms of timing, you really want to start as early as possible for a couple reasons. One is that social media is a long play. It takes time to build an audience. The other is that you can get so much anticipation going. You can share your concept art and your storyboards. You can, talk about things you changed in the first draft of your script. That behind the scenes process, it seems mundane and everyday to people in the industry, but to lay people, it's really interesting and it helps you build an audience and build people who are really invested in your product, in your show and in your movies really early on, that they're so excited because they've been with you the whole way and they feel like part of your family.
And there's actually some interesting stories and experiences I've had with other people across Europe where, and this is often forgotten around social media, crowdfunding is social media, and it's actually part of your your strategy. So there have been filmmakers that I've worked with who literally raise their money. So when you're talking about your community investing like their time or engagement, literally he got them to invest. He gets them to invest in the film that he's making. And while it doesn't cover the whole budget, it gets dedicated fans or dedicated community members. So it's something to always think about in terms of at least how to get some sort of initial funding, but also really starting that process very early of getting a community is crowdfunding.
I think that's such a good example, and anybody who's ever done a Kickstarter or GoFundMe knows that they're kind of a cheerleader. They're rooting for that project. So that's a really good example.
So I know you mentioned like the idea of like incorporating your crew or, different aspects of film or television. What are sort of the unique aspects of those mediums that you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about social?
Sure. So with entertainment, social media has some very interesting challenges. And one of them is that people generally sort of watch TV or movies for the same reason, but they choose them based on their taste and how they want to feel and what they like to watch. It's sort of the same thing as jewelry. We all wear, if women wear jewelry, we wear it for the same reason, to adorn ourselves. Maybe if it's a fine piece for investment, but it is just a matter of taste. Music is the same. Like we all listen to feel something or to distract ourselves or to set a mood. But what we like is just a matter of personal taste. And entertainment's the same thing. And that's hard. So that's one aspect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about values later on. The second is timing. Is that if you're selling a product, you're selling it hopefully forever, but you have a season or you have a movie release that just happens once, and then maybe 3 years later, you have a sequel. If you have a show, you might only have one season a year. And then there's also the streaming has really changed this because it's not like you have an 8-month season. You might have a week, a year in which everybody binges and talks about your show. And you better be ready for that one binging week. If you have a show that's dripped out week by week, you have a little bit more of an advantage. But the timing can be very strange, is that you have this big buildup, this big event, and then silence for a while. And you have to keep that community alive if you're going to have a second season, and you have to keep feeding content and enthusiasm into something that's really quite dormant. But what's really special is that there are communities and there are people who connect, and that's really what can help keep things alive. And that even if people aren't viewing it at the same time, there is a shared viewing experience of like the way that people connect, but it's not that weekly rhythm where everybody was excited about things at the same time anymore, which is something that's really changing across the industry. And you have to be able to like keep the social media community alive without spoilers. And so timing is different and the values are different, but that community and the affinity, how much people love it, are so much stronger. People feel the way about movies and TV a way they're never going to feel about toothpaste or clothes or anything like that. So you have that. We absolutely have that to our advantage.
Well, that kind of gets us a little bit into the next point there, because I think once you understand your timing, you know what kind of when your show's releasing and all of those factors. You know when you think about your social media strategy, I've talked to you about this a lot. It's like you've got to really have your big picture, right? And for filmmakers, that's always an important thing. They understand that. How do you find the big picture, if you will, for your social media strategy for film and TV?
Sure. So with TV and film, you really sort of want to start with the value. And I don't necessarily mean the value like the morals, the value in the way, how does your show or movie make someone's life better? Is it, thrilling? Is it inspiring? Is it distracting? Is it humorous? Is it beautiful? And know that. And that's one of those deep core things that should be at your heart of all your social media is, how does this make someone's life better? Does it educate them? I think that in some cases, sometimes with documentary or with content that deals with something like a political issue, you're actually making people's life better by increasing awareness and addressing the issue. And sometimes like in a show like Handmaid's Tale, you see that people want that to talk about as a tool to talk about the current political climate. So that's a particular value. Horror has that value of giving people that adrenaline rush and they feel great afterward. Like people love that scare. Humor is really obvious, I think. Sci-fi acts as this way to either give people an alternative future that they want or really don't want, or it's distractive and imaginative and that inspires people. So you really want to think about that way, that value that you bring to people's life, and how you want people to feel. And that's really what your brand is. And branding is more difficult in TV and film. It's not just your logo and your colors and your website. That's one kind of branding, but your branding is that way that you bring value to the world and maybe a lifestyle associated with it. And it really becomes a form of identity. It becomes a way for people to express themselves in a way that nothing besides entertainment, TV, film, music can really do, is that people identify and feel that their own self and who they are is defined by what they're watching.
And I think that's so true, because I think, and this is such an important piece for film and TV people to understand, because when we think of brand, we think of products. We don't think of our movie. We don't think of our TV show. But in truth, they are a product. And we do have to think about it. And each product, each show has its own brand. A show about Chernobyl is a very different brand and value than a show about your weird family and all their mishaps and the crazy catastrophes that happen every time, every week when someone brings home a friend from school or something. So those are two very different brands. And so you really, when you're thinking about your campaign, right, you have to be thinking, what is my brand? What is my audience, and what does my audience perceive the brand as, right? So how do they, and because they watch my show, that's an expression of themselves. So you really have to be careful to respect that, not only for your own, marketing or your own awareness, but really for your audience, because that's what they're buying into, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely see people who can really kind of betray that identity by not understanding their audience and that people identify with them. There are, shows and movies where the creators have taken it in a different direction. And there's one I'm thinking of, but hopefully I'll think of it by the end of the conversation, where people revolted and did not like where the people were taking it. And it felt as a betrayal of their identity. You've seen that a lot with, the kind of Me Too movement, and when people Joss Whedon comes to mind, acts like, he creates this really feminist characters and wants to be empowering of women, but maybe, allegedly that's not the case behind the scenes. That makes people feel, all the super rabid, excited fans who have put so much of themselves in that emotionally feel super betrayed by that. So that's sort of a extreme example of betraying a brand. But there's also like so many different ways people feel and what makes people feel good and what makes people feel uncomfortable. I think of, I have one friend who cannot stand watching comedy because it just it hurts for him. It's like he can feel the embarrassing pain of the characters. Or for me, I can't watch anything like Handmaid's Tale. It's too that isn't fun for me. That's horrible for me. And I want escapism. So everybody has a different way that they relate in a different kind of emotional experience that the audience wants to take out of things. And that's part of the identity as well, is why they like to feel the way that they do.
That's like a comedic Kaspar Hauser, which we famously couldn't listen to music, right? But he can't listen to stand-up comedy. I think that's great. There's like a whole interesting film right there.
Yeah, and I know like one of the one of the first major content creators, at least in Hollywood, to really sort of take advantage of the brand building and sort of the community building was Shonda Rhimes with Scandal. With Kerry Washington being online in real time during each episode each week. And maybe you can, I don't know how familiar you are with those shows and with Chandra, but, maybe we can talk a little bit about like how she had recognized early on just the assets that, something like Twitter and watching sort of merge together.
Absolutely. What Shonda did with Scandal on Twitter was absolutely brilliant and unprecedented, and really showed that she understood her community. So one of the things that Shonda really understood was the Black community on Twitter, which is this whole thing. It's actually called Black Twitter, and it is incredible, and it is powerful and opinionated. And she just harnessed that to this amazing degree that people couldn't stop talking about the show. And it was, and then she had these live events during the show when it aired where people would participate, and they got, the actors, she participated. Everybody knew that they could go in and have this voice and that other people who watch the show would understand them. And that is absolutely what, this is what it's about. And I think that you could see, the last kind of shared experience viewing show was Game of Thrones, and it was always trending. If you didn't watch on time on Sunday night, you could not go on social media until you watched, or you would find spoilers. It was always trending. And that's, a little bit of a holy grail. It's hard to recreate if you're not in Game of Thrones. But I think that you would see that these whole communities would go absolutely nuts for things. And there's shows that years later are still creating memes, still have rabid communities. People have not stopped, even though the shows have sometimes been off the air for years. You see it a lot in Facebook groups dedicated to shows. They're just rewatching it and posting and making new memes. And it's pretty amazing. And it's not just always shows you associate with super fans. It can kind of be, anything that just got people that excited.
And I think what we've, not to bury the lead, because the whole point of all this, thinking about brand and values is, and it's what you said about Shonda Rhimes, is that she understood her community. It's always about community. And you mentioned Joss Whedon earlier, and though Josh was operating a little bit earlier before all the social platforms, he was a very big involvement in Comic-Con. He understands his community, or did at least then. And I think that's all. And I think these early adapters who were doing it did it mostly just because they cared and they understood their community. That's where it came from. It was completely authentic. But I think that's where filmmakers and producers and people, content creators, need to understand is that's the goal. It's about the community. If you don't understand your community, work really hard to try to understand them, because that's really where that's really the magic. That's what really this is all about.
And I think that the key there is that an audience that's well understood, really well connected to, really well catered to, turns into a community, right? And that's the goal of what we're doing here, is turning that audience that we started with into a community, which is actually what we end with and, continue to come back to, is that an audience that's well understood turns into a community. And, going back to what you're saying about Joss Whedon and Comic-Con and being on things before social media, what happened is you have the Comic-Con culture, and then, that's chilling, and then you have the social media culture come in, and that just skyrocketed,
Yes.
the Comic-Con culture. And when you go to Comic-Con, it is, as a marketer, it's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. You have created a church that people are worshiping at. They are waiting in line for hours to worship at the feet of your brand. And it is, it's kind of a fantasy from a marketing perspective that you could get people to be that excited, but they're that excited because they feel that the show gets them, and they feel that the other people who watch and love the show as much as they do understand them more than anyone else. And that is why people get so excited about things. And I have this interesting story from when I went to Comic-Con. Me and my friend dressed up, but we dressed up as random science fiction, like cute aliens, and we didn't dress up as a brand. And that was a mistake. People didn't get us, that we just wanted to be, cute space aliens. They are like, but what brand are you? Why are you not from a brand? And right. That was, this light bulb went off for me, that I was not understanding what the culture was about. It was like, which group are you a part of?
Which tribe are you part of?
Which tribe are you a part of? And you've chosen to just be like an artistic self-expression tribe, but you needed to be part of someone's group, and you needed to express what group you were most excited to be a part of.
Did you change your brand the following year?
I did not go back. I've only been once, but it was as a marketer, it's overwhelming. Like it's because I personally can't go to Comic-Con as a consumer. I can only go to Comic-Con as a marketer, and I needed like a 3-day nap afterward. It was a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
So we talked obviously about the advantages with social and film and television. What with that, obviously on the flip side, what are the major challenges that come with social engagement around TV and film?
Sure. So I think there's two main challenges. One is the timing, which we talked about earlier, is that you might have like one release ever of your movie. You're building up, you have the movie come out, and then you're just kind of trying to get people to continue to stream it after that. Or your show is, you release it, people watch it over a week, you have a year till the next season. So timing is really hard. The other is a little bit of this break in between devices. So we all live this multi-screen lifestyle, but if I'm engaging, let's say in a Facebook group about a show, while I'm at lunch, I might not watch that show then. I might watch that show later on my TV at night, like a couple days later. And if you're doing like e-commerce, for instance, if I see something I want, I go click on it right then and I buy it on the same device. There's a linear click path to fulfillment. And with entertainment, it's not like that at all. You have to get people often to switch devices. You have to get them from their phone or their computer to their TV, or their, computer to their iPad, wherever they watch. A lot of times you have that device thing and a break in time between when they're engaging on it and when they're actually consuming it, because we don't just be like, oh, I feel like watching TV, I'm just going to go watch that right now. That's just not how our time is divided in our lives. So what you really need to do to drive that audience to a film or show is create, in English, we call it FOMO, which stands for fear of missing out. And FOMO is that, I know I'm being translated. So I'm sure FOMO doesn't translate.
FOMO doesn't, but fear of missing out definitely translates.
And I hope there's some awesome Ukrainian acronym for it. That would be so great. Let me know what it is. So FOMO is the feeling, though, that it is that feeling we were just talking about with Game of Thrones, that if you don't watch, you can't even go on the internet. You can't even go on social media. So the feeling that like it's that itch that you have to scratch to watch the show, that you are not up to date and you are not cool if you do not fit in, if you have not watched. And that's really the feeling that of urgency that we all want to create in our audience. And that helps bridge that divide of both device and time.
When you talk about this, because I mean, we've talked about some big projects, you know, how does the strategy change maybe when you're, you know, involved in a more independent project or a small digital project on YouTube, which quite frankly, a lot of the projects we are dealing with, which what part of Pitch UA are, they're smaller. You know, what is the different thinking that you have when you strategize for something like that, where you don't necessarily have all the marketing that's going to get the game, like the Game of Thrones or something like that?
Right. I mean, Game of Thrones is this cultural example, but everybody is probably like, great, doesn't apply to me.
Right.
So you have such an advantage the only difference is budget, and you don't need it. Social media is something that is inherently free. I mean, time isn't free, it takes time. But the only difference is if you have an advertising budget, and because you have to make first contact with people, right? You have to have people to know about you for the very first time, and advertising is a really easy way to do that. But let's say you don't have advertising budget, no problem at all. Because what you do have is that like scrappy, all hands on deck mentality that a big project just can't do. Can you imagine trying to get like every single person at a Marvel movie to like contribute social media content? It would be a mess. But when you have a small project, everybody's heart is in it. Everybody cares. Everybody is working overtime. And that's what shows on social media, is how much people care and how much heart they have and how much more you want to support them. Like, I don't really care if a movie with The Rock in it does well or not. Like, it's going to do fine. He's cool. Everybody's fine, right? It's high budget. Mm-hmm. It's all great. But when I have a property that I really care about, the people who make it, I really want it to do well. I'm more invested in it. I think a great example is podcasts, and podcasts are usually small and independent, and you know the host, you care about the host. I often find myself looking at pictures of the host, so I know like what they look like, and I can, you know, follow them on Instagram, because I am not connected to like the big corporate property. I'm connected to that individual, that content creator. So you can put yourself in it as a voice, as a creator, as someone that people can connect to and care about, and cares about the fans and the audience and wants to connect with them. And that interpersonal connection, that ability to show up and be present, that for your audience, that's more powerful than funding. So, and a lot of times you can only get that with a small project. But otherwise, you can.
And I think we also talked about it earlier, the crowdfunding. You don't crowdfund Marvel, right? You don't crowdfund Game of Thrones, but you can crowdfund these small projects where, because I mean, what happens? You mentioned it. You have these people who invest in a crowdfunding project of just a few dollars, even now feel like they're a producer. Like they can start telling their friends, "Oh, I invest in this TV show," or I'm, and then what they do is they go and get more people to watch the show, right? So you get that evangelical effect where people start to get really excited because this is something that they literally helped finance. I mean, it's not just I gave my thumbs up. It's like you actually put some money in, and it makes your belief in it even stronger as a community member.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be money. It can just be heart. It can just be, oh, I talked to that person. They answered my comment on Instagram. Like that's enough to get people invested. Right. Is like if you answer their comment on Instagram, they're like, oh my God, there's actually a human there. And I talked to them and they'll be just as excited, which is really cool. I also, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
so.
No, it's good. Let's move to process, because there's a lot to talk about there. Here, I'm just going to jump into it then. What are the important factors when you're thinking about now? You've figured out a strategy. What's the process? What is important to keep in mind?
Okay, so this is much more, tactical than what we've been talking about before, which has been very high level. But what you want to, we talked about having all hands on deck and starting as early as possible, but that doesn't mean it's a free for all, and it doesn't mean you can't control your message. So you often want to think about who you kind of want to create a social media policy, some rules around it. Figure out who you want to get content from, figure out who the gatekeeper is, who does the posting. So you do want people to post on all their own accounts because they all have their own networks, but then you also want to be gathering that on your main accounts. You often want a social media policy, what you want to show, what you don't want to show. Sometimes you might not want to give away spoilers, you might not want to give away certain intellectual property, and you want to make sure people are very clear on what they can show and not show on their social, also what's appropriate and not appropriate. And that can be, on a corporate level, that can be on a kind of HR level. There's just a lot of things you can say and not say, and you want everyone to know that. So the key here is to just write down how you want to do it, whether it's there's one person, anybody can post what they want. All content goes in a Google Drive folder, and then, one person posts it. There's, we all use the same hashtag. There's all these different ways to do it. And that's not something that we can go into on this call. It's very,
and that's,
yeah.
And that's part of the training, right? Like that's when a mentor or someone comes in like you, or when you have a social media specialist, they're going to train all the different people who are part of it.
Totally. So what we were going to go into next is that as a consultant, every single one of my clients does social media differently based on their organization. And that's why I can't tell you one way to do it, but you do want to have a training. You do want to have documentation. You do want to have tools. You do want to have a process in place that everybody knows how to follow. Is there one good process? No, there's infinite processes for infinite organizations, but you'll set up what works for you. And they're all different, but you want it to be coordinated. You want it to be pre-planned, and at the same time, this is the contradiction of social media. You do want it to feel organic, like you're having an authentic connection. Social media is not the place to make people feel like marketed to and they're only getting ads. They want to have an interpersonal connection. So we're getting it organized to make it feel more organic. As confusing as that is.
No, but that's what's the trick. That's what it's about.
That's the trick.
And I know we talked about actors briefly early on, but in terms of like key people in this process, who are they? And then you mentioned coordinated. How important is consistency as well with that coordination?
Sure. So consistency is everything in social media, whether you figure out you can post twice a week or twice a day. Consistency is important. The technical parts of the social network that decide what you see, those are called the algorithms, which is a whole other topic for another time. Yes. They like consistency. So figure out a pace you can kind of have and stick to it. And in terms of who those players are, actors usually play a critical role. They're the most famous. They usually have the biggest following. And, people are cast now based on their social media following. It's, you can't get a book deal until you have a certain number, or a music contract until you have a certain number of social media followers. And that's because they help the project. They help people want to know you have that established audience. So actors usually play the most critical role because they're the most famous. And they already do this for themselves. They're already sharing. I know that yesterday, for instance, Channing Tatum posted just the first page of the script of a new Magic Mike movie, and everybody was freaking out, right? So it's very behind the scenes, showing just the first page of the script. But he's the one that the fans connect to. So that's how that project was announced. And then people were like freaking out about it. So most actors are inherently good at social media because every actor is like a brand and a promotional vehicle onto themselves, right? That's how they keep their fame going. And there's sometimes some very unexpected actors that are very good at it. So for instance, Anthony Hopkins, who's in his 80s right now, has an amazing social media. He's hilarious. But then there's some like Jennifer Lawrence doesn't use social media at all. even though she's way more in the age group that would be targeted to it. But you also want to think about people who have very visual content. So I'd love to follow like makeup people and special effects makeup and costume people and stuff like that. It's just this like, you never get to see that work up close, but sometimes what they're doing is incredible and really interesting. You can follow composers, you can follow crew people, you can follow craft services. To people who are not in the industry, the making of entertainment is absolutely fascinating. And that's something that is people who are close to it, we forget. But I remember once my sister, who lives in Chicago, met a friend who was just an actor in commercials when she was out here visiting me. And she was so excited. You've been on TV, which is like the people in LA and probably people in the, your film industry. Of course, that's not a big deal. You meet people everywhere that have been on TV, but to her, as just a consumer, that was really cool. So never underestimate the power of behind the scenes content.
I think that's a really good point. I think, and we're even with some of the projects we've done, some actually have social media personalities as kind of the celebrities. So that's kind of already really happening organically in even just the projects we've been involved with. So once you sort of have your training and you have your people in place and you have all that stuff's done, what's next? What you've got all the stuff ready up until the release of the show. Do you continue posting after the show? What are some ideas to be thinking about as filmmakers in maybe those different sort of stages, both really just the before release and after release?
Sure. So the idea before is that FOMO that we talked about before, right? Getting people to be so excited, and think of it as like a build up to a concert and how you might go listen to that artist more in the build up to a concert or something like that. And you might really be thinking about what you're going to wear to the concert and even buying a new outfit or something like that, right? You want that build up. So you want people maybe to be rewatching the old seasons or, planning an event around it. There are definitely people when they're that excited, they're like, this is what I'm doing at midnight, the day that comes out, right? And so the more you can get people excited, looking forward to, have them put it on their calendar, that's a really good thing. There's also like on the YouTube side, there's a very small version of it. Like best practices on YouTube are to always release your show on YouTube at the same time every week. This show comes out Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Right. And that's good YouTube best practice because people start to look forward to it and you train your audience to be excited just for that release. So it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be a little thing that every week on Tuesdays at 10, you're excited to watch your favorite YouTube series. So that anticipation is does not have to be for a big thing. And it's even a habit that you can train people into. Afterward things definitely do slow down, but that's when you really kind of can sort out the people who love you the most. And it's when you can really create community as people who are watching things again, still thinking about it, have questions for you. It's a time where you're less busy possibly, and you can be more available. So you could have Q&As, you could talk about things that you were hiding before because they're spoilers. You can go into more detail. You can start talking about what's next, whether that's a different film project or the next season. You can have people, and that buzz, if that keeps going, that can also help inspire a second season. It can help get you funding and support and things like that to show that people really cared about this. So I think the idea is to look at your comments and look at your community and look at your hashtags and do a search for yourself all the time and see what people are still talking about and talk about it with them. Get in there, participate, feed whatever is coming up organically.
Right. Yeah. And I think you make an important point that we all need to listen to is like, just because your project launched and premiered, it doesn't mean the community has gone away. So it's important to keep keep building off of that and keep putting out new content to, both for your own brand and also the show's brand. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a very common, like, that's when it starts, because that's when your audience can view it, right? That's not when it ends for you, but it starts for them.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I just did a movie for Netflix, and that was their whole spiel, right? Is like, we have no marketing dollars, but the reality is like, once your project launches on our site, it's just the beginning of a very, very long journey, and that the community, whether it's through Netflix's social media engagement, it just keeps building off of each other, and it's a pretty fascinating thing to watch. Mm-hmm. So, well, speaking of marketing and community, because I tend to, sort of converge the two, but really, how is building awareness and excitement and community building different than sort of quote unquote traditional marketing?
Sure. So the real difference is that traditional marketing is a one-way street. It's broadcast only. And community building and everything you do on social media needs to be a conversation. It needs to be interactive. It's a two-way street. And that's very different, right? A billboard doesn't talk to you. A billboard doesn't answer your question. A billboard doesn't get all the other fans to agree or disagree or debate with you. So social media provides this unique place it's an amazing opportunity, but for content creators, it's also a responsibility for us to participate in that two-way street, to make it interactive, to respond to comments, to open yourself up for Q&A, to share the process, and there's so many tools for doing that. There's, the Q&A feature in Instagram stories. Just even responding to comments is a huge, huge deal. This is something in which the media does not control the message. It's something where it's the consumers and the content creators are participating in it together. And the more you get in there and participate with your people, the stronger the community is going to be. Also, the better you're going to understand them, the better you're going to know what to feed them, the better you're going to know how to get them so excited about stuff. So it's a completely, a lot of times in marketing, we make a media plan, right? This ad goes out on this day. The Facebook ads run from this date to this date with this budget. And community is always going. Something can always happen, and it doesn't just happen where you control it. You might find that a fan site pops up, or there's a certain user who talks about your show all the time, and you can go participate on their channel and in their comments, and even reach out to them and kind of do an Instagram live or something with them, or you harness their community. It's a place where we don't always, as marketers, don't always own the channels in which the most influential conversations are taking place.
Well, that gets us to that next point, which is, this unusual concept that's grown called the Superfan, which, as you said, it was that moment when the cons met the social media and it just completely exploded, right? Tell us a little bit about sort of that and how you work with superfans.
Sure. So a super fan is, I've worked a lot. When I worked with Britney Spears, I talked to the super fans daily because some of them would run fan sites that would have way more page views than our website would and way more social media followers and things like that. They also live and breathe the product. And if you do not, like with Britney, if we did not understand Britney in the way the fans did, and cater to the fans. These are people who have tattoos of Britney Spears or her lyrics or something on their bodies, right? This is not, and they believe that they see something of themselves in Britney's lyrics or her personality, and that other fans of Britney who love Britney as much as they do understand them better. And this is not just limited to giant artists. There are, certainly artists with huge fandoms and film and TV products with huge fandoms, but it can exist in very small ways too, is that there can be some little tiny band and they have this very small community of people who go around to all their shows, but those people know that everybody else who follows them, they have something in common with, and they do. When you see the fans get together, they'll meet up in person, they'll have Zoom meetups. they have communities just for them. They all know each other around the world, which is really cool. And I've seen it again for some very small properties before. So these are people who there's that part of their identity that's really invested in it, but they often control some media around it too, which is amazing. So I would say talk to those people, get to know them, understand their psychology, understand what they control, get them on your side, interview them, give them special VIP status. The most important thing you can do online is give someone VIP status. Give them like an announcement to release first, give them, a preview, give them a Q&A with an actor. Like there's so many different things you can do to make them feel special, but their rapidity, their excitement will spread and multiply. And it'll be so much more authentic because it comes from that fan and not from you as a promotional property.
And what about influencers? How are they different? And how do I, if I'm Joe Blow and I have a piece of content, how do I reach out to them?
Sure. So super fans are different. Super fans, it's about like one or a couple properties. Usually they're fandoms of a couple things. They're in more than one fandom. An influencer is someone who has a lot of followers, really is the definition of an influencer, for whatever reason. An influencer is often someone who has a lot of followers because they create a lifestyle that people want. But when you're looking for right, because media companies might have a lot of followers, but that's for a different reason. And actors or celebrities might have a lot of followers for a different reason. But influencers have a lot of followers because they create a lifestyle that people want. And what you want to do for any influencer is find one that has the same audience that you're looking for. So if you have a reality TV show on makeovers, you might want to find someone with makeup and hair and fashion expertise. If you have a show about sports, you might want to, or fitness, you might want to get a trainer. There's different, you want to find an influencer who has the followers you're looking for. And then when you contact an influencer, the best thing to do is we could do a whole session just on influencer, but you want to reach out to them just as humanly as possible. Don't sound like a publicist, sound like a person who really cares, and defer to their ego. Be like, you're really great. And if you maybe want to work together, that would be awesome. Just let me know. And do expect to pay them different rates for every follower, but do have a budget for it, or give them something very VIP that makes them look cool. But you just want to find someone who you're like, they're just very much in line, and they don't have to be big. The big trend right now is nano influencers, which are people who maybe have 5,000 to 20,000 followers. So we're not talking some huge, millions of followers person. That's like a real celebrity endorsement. Just, people you can pay, a couple $100 to someone with 20,000 followers, and their followers will, they listen to them. There's a trust there between influencers and their audience. And that's really what you're trying to harness, is that trust between an influencer and an audience. It's very hard for people to trust a brand in the same way.
So, I think you're right. There's a lot we could keep going on about influencers. I think, and you really, the big difference for people to understand is that superfans, you don't have to pay superfans. They want to do it, right? Influencers are a little bit different, right? They may be a fan of the thing, they may love it, but you kind of have to expect to sort of treat this as a business relationship much more formally. Mm-hmm. That's Absolutely. A pretty good way to say it. So as we wrap up, I want to give just some kind of big takeaways at the end here about the strategy. So, you've done all of this. What's great about this forum, if you will, of the internet and social media is you're able to calculate if your strategy is working. How do you calculate that? How do you know if what you've done is right, if your personas were correct, if you're doing things in the right way?
Sure. So what's so great about social media is that there is so much data available to you. And you can learn to read that data. So what I like to do is pick one metric that's the most exciting to you, most important to you. I like to call that a North Star metric and use it to guide you. But if you don't know what to use engagement rate, which is basically how engaging the number of likes, comments, saves, et cetera, divided by the number of followers. But you could choose likes, you could choose comments. Shares is really a popular one because that shows the number of people that want to repeat what you're saying, or saves because that shows that people want to come back to it and watch it again, and it resonated enough with them to file it away. So shares and saves are very popular right now. It's also sometimes different on every social network, like sharing on Instagram is a little hard to do. So, but focus on what drives that one metric you choose, and always keep that goal in mind, and watch what drives it up, watch what drives it down. And but there's so much good data on social media. The consumers tell you what they want with their behavior.
So, and then just sort of before we go, sort of the summary of what the deck. So what are like the major points, like the major takeaways about building and engaging a community from your perspective?
I mean, it's really about that relationship, that two-way street, and that, interaction and emotion. So make people feel close to you, make people feel invested in you, make them feel understood, make them feel that they've invested their identity in you and that you care about that and you understand it. Make sure you don't make it a one-way street. Make sure you do participate. Someone on your team participates, make it a two-way street. Know what is, track that buzz, know what's going on in your community and be an authentic part of it. Like, be a humble participator in the world that you've created, and that will and help create that world around you, just like, along with the fans, along with your audience. And when you and the audience create that world together, some really magical stuff is going to happen.
Oh, that's perfect. All right. So as promised, we're going to now do a quick debrief and a summary of what we talked about, because it's a lot of stuff. And we even have a lovely deck to do it with us. So Lauren, I'm just going to launch the deck, and you have a little, in each one have a little kind of try this hint. So why don't we just start with this? The first thing we talked about was audience. Okay.
So for audience, one of the things I wanted to do with this final, wrap up slide is give you actual things to do. We talk about, like, this can be very abstract, but you have to actually do social media, right? You can't just think about social media. So I wanted to give you some actions for each one. So
That's
for
great.
audience, go ahead and write those characters, make those personas, create those typical audience members as characters, and start to really think about them and cast them in your world.
Next is inspiration.
Yes. So for inspiration, pick that inspirational starting point, that image, that tagline, the brand colors, mission statement, demographic, emotions, whatever it is, even that North Star metric, whatever it is that's going to drive you forward, that you're going to keep checking your strategy against. Go ahead and pick one, write it down in capital letters, and come back to it over and over again.
Then there's the emotion.
Sure. So I do this with every single one of my clients. I think emotion is so, so important. And so I write down 3 to 5 emotions that are how I want people to feel when they're on my social media accounts. And I make sure that every piece of content brings that up in some way. Social media is actually very emotional. And I think if you watch yourself on social media, you can see, like, that made me sad, that made me inspired, that made me jealous, that bummed me out. Right. And watch your own feelings. And a lot of it's subconscious, but we want to make sure that you're really tapping into that emotion. So write them down and make sure every piece of content taps into those emotions in some way.
Their timing.
So go ahead and make that calendar as it relates to your content release schedule. How early can you start? Start 2 weeks ago. But think about that pacing and know that you might need to be gathering content now for something that goes out in 2 weeks. Know that, if your release week is going to be crazy, then you want to start pre-planning for that now. There's tools like Buffer and Sprout Social that you can actually schedule social content ahead of time. So you could even plan now and schedule things out in advance.
Values.
So write that value statement. How do you make the world a better place? How do you make your viewers' lives better? Know that and always keep that in mind too. And I think you're starting to see that there's a little bit of a document on your wall. That's your strategy, right? It has your emotions, it has your North Star metric, it has your value statement, right? These are the things that are in your strategy that you're always coming back to.
Your brand.
So see how people express themselves around your brand or a similar one if you're new. See what people are doing out there. See how people talk about it, how people identify with it, what kind of content people make. Do people go on Jiffy? Like, are people making memes and GIFs out of your brand? Are they, sharing facts from it? Are they doing character quizzes? Are they reacting to things? Are they doing YouTube, summaries on it? See what people do. And if you're new, find a show that inspires you and see how people are that's similar and see how people are doing it there.
All right, process.
So a good exercise here is to list out everyone involved with your project and highlight, go through your roster of everyone on your project and highlight who you think could make great social content. They have a great voice. They have a lot of followers. They do something visual. Those are really good indicators that they're going to be good at social.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
And then community.
So for community, find at least 3 super fans of your work or similar work and interview them. Do not try to do this based on what you think is right. Do this on what your audience thinks is right. So talk to people, interview them, run things by them, like pay them a little bit of money to be on be a sounding board for you. Make it a two-way street and get the advice of your audience. So you're really engaging them and doing it right and listening to them. So interview people, keep them on hand to ask questions to. And the secret is that when you interview those super fans, they're going to be more invested in your brand because they feel like part of it. So it's like an added bonus that you're creating a super loyal fan and viewer by asking their opinion.
That is awesome. Well, there you go. So Lauren, thank you. This was a lot of information. And as we talked about in preparation for this, we could drill down into a bunch of these areas and go into more detail. Now, we're going to turn it over to our audience, talking about the two-way street. We're going to ask Alex to join us again and see if we can field some questions with Lauren, because we have you here live. We want to make the most of it.
All right, great points. Thank you very much, Lauren, Adam, Josh. Very interesting. And I hope people were able to take notes from your presentation. Якщо ви не встигли щось...
If you didn't have enough time to note something down out of this presentation, or you would like to see it again, do not forget that all of our workshops are posted online at the website of pitchua.com. So please visit the website. There you can watch this workshop, our previous workshops, and I do appeal for you. Please do that. If you've got now any questions, please write them down at the platform where you're watching us now.
All right, here are some questions that have already come in, and I have a couple myself. Yeah. So the first question is, are there any tips on how to be more creative while working on the same project for a long time?
Sure, that's a really good question. So what's great is that even if your project isn't changing, social media is. So I would recommend that you spend time looking at social media and get in different things. Look at Instagram Reels, look at TikTok, look at those cutting edge places where new things are coming out all the time and there's new trends. So what I would say is that you can follow the trends that are changing with new content on the with new content around, or sorry, same content, different trends, right? So in different formats is another trick. You can make a 30-second reel, you can make a 60-second Instagram video, you can make a 3 or 5 minute YouTube video, you can make an animated GIF, you can make a carousel, you can make a shareable with text on it, you can make a quote. You can make like a little mini article in a carousel. You can do a photo with a really long thing. You can get into like your history and what inspired you. There are so many formats. So one is follow trends to add freshness. The second is so many different formats. I mean, that's a small list. I think I once listed out and came up with like 50 different potential social media formats or things you could do. So you can absolutely change up the format. And the third is user-generated content, is you can ask other people what they want to see, or ask other people to contribute things, or if you're have conversations like this or an Instagram Live and break that up into pieces, right? That's the other thing is with content formats is you can always remix them, right? You can take your 30-minute video and cut it into like a bunch of 30-second videos and 5-minute videos and quotes and whatnot. So don't forget that remix. And also like with UGC, user-generated content, you can open it up to questions and answer them. The other thing is you can slow down, right? You don't have to be posting constantly. If your project, if you're trying to do 7 days a week, you're going to burn out. Maybe you're a once a week project and that's okay. And you can, so bring in other voices, slow down. Those are, lots of tips.
Good one. Here's the next question. Could you explain the main difference between Facebook and Instagram in terms of marketing? What works best for attracting professional audience? Sure. So Facebook and Instagram are really quite different. And one of the first things has to do with format. On Instagram, you have to have a visual, right? You have to have a video or an image, and you can't really have a link, right? You can have your link sticker, or if you have more than 10,000 followers, you can have a swipe up. You get that one link in bio, right? On Facebook, you can link as much as you want. Facebook is more robust in terms of features. It has groups, it has events, and it's very clickable. You can really drive traffic out of Facebook. They also have a little bit of a different culture. Instagram is a little bit more youthful. Facebook is a little bit older, a little bit more stodgy. So I think that, but I am going to have a caveat that I understand that Facebook culture may be different in other, like internationally and in the Ukraine than it is in the United States. So I think that in the United States, Facebook is starting to get a little dusty and be like, it's definitely like an older audience, a stodgier audience, and people are moving to Instagram and TikTok way more, but that isn't true internationally. So I am going to put that caveat on that. But you can't have a group on Instagram. Think of how powerful a group could be. For people still use Facebook groups at all ages. So think about what a group could look like around your brand or around your product. What are some of the other differences? But Instagram can be really hard if you don't have a visual, like if you're a business to business kind of thing, that isn't going to be an issue here. Everybody in entertainment has visuals. So I think of it as, but on Instagram, the two-way street only kind of takes place in those comments and in comments, whereas on Facebook, you can have a group, you can have a lot more conversation there. So I think the formats where the two-way conversations take place. I also think on Instagram, reels and stories are very trendy, very effective, get more exposure. And there's a lot of interactive features in those reels, right? There's the Q&A feature, there's the sliders, there's polls and quizzes, there's Instagram Live, which you can have with up to 4 people. So I think that engagement on Instagram takes place in stories, and it doesn't take place in something like groups. And every social network, whether you get in on LinkedIn, you get it on Twitter, you get it on TikTok, is going to have these like formatting and interpersonal relation differences. And so that makes it lots of fun and really challenging, is that no two social networks are the same.
And what about the hashtags?
I was going to just follow up to Alex's question is, So if I'm producing content that I want to use and release through Instagram and Facebook, should I release the same content and format, or should I think about it differently, saying like, all right, I should edit this differently on Facebook as I would on Instagram?
I would say that a lot of the times you can release similar content. You just have to reformat it based on the restrictions. So Facebook, you can have a longer video. Instagram, you're going to want like 60 seconds or less, sort of. So you just kind of do these edits, right? Or horizontal versus vertical, or, there's different formatting edits. But the content can be similar. What's different is, again, the specifics of the format and how you engage and how you interact. And then just a little thing is, don't post the same content at the same time. It's called blanketing. So basically remix it, shake it up. And if you're posting a video on Facebook one day, don't post it till next week on Instagram or something like that. So shake it up, but make the formats right. When you put like a video that's very clearly for Instagram on Facebook or vice versa, people feel it's like having someone over for dinner and serving them leftovers. They know that you're reusing the content and it's not right.
I love that.
Yeah, but now that they have emerged, you basically with one click post on both platforms.
You can do that, but she's suggesting maybe you don't. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, you can cross post stuff, but then people know, for instance, that your tags don't work. For instance, if I tag you, Alex, on Instagram, and then that shows up on Facebook, it's not going to tag you. So what's that saying is, I made this yesterday, reheated it, and I'm serving it to you. Like I'm serving you a leftover. Same thing with hashtags. What you're going to ask is that hashtags on Facebook are not really a thing. They're a thing on Instagram. So when I see hashtags on Facebook or tags on Facebook, I know that this is not fresh content made for me. And I feel like you're being lazy as a content creator.
Right, because hashtags are for searching. So that's the difference, right? You don't search on Facebook the same way as you do on Instagram.
I mean, they work, but culturally, they're not a thing.
Right.
And so it just says, I reposted this. Like, you're an afterthought.
Well, I had to tell you that in Ukraine, people put hashtags everywhere.
I believe that. I believe that. But everybody in America, too, people put hashtags on everything. But what a hashtag says is that followers, it's great if you see this, but I really want anybody else to see this. I don't really care about your experience as a follower. You can have a line of text and 30 hashtags. And what that says is that getting new people and promoting myself is more important than having a good experience for you as my current follower and community member. So I really advise people, regardless of the social network or the country or anything, because people post tons of them here too. I'm not a fan because there's reasons to use them and we all want to grow and they do help. And especially for an event or connecting people over time, like, you needed that hashtag scandal if you were part of the Shonda discussion. That's a big deal. But if I put that hashtag cloud of 30 hashtags, I'm saying this post isn't for you, community member. This post is to try to lure in anybody else, but you don't matter. You can just read my promotional hashtag cloud.
You said that very quickly. Make it very clear. It's if you're using many hashtags, you're looking desperate, essentially. If you're going to use a hashtag or a few hashtags for very particular reasons that make a kind of editorial point, that's great. But if you're just trying to, like, anyone in any possible way may find me somehow, it just starts reading as kind of like, I just care about, the attention and not necessarily what I'm trying to say.
Exactly. And the point of a hashtag should be to connect you to a community you want to be connected to, right? And then it could be an editorial point, but it's to connect you. So if you're just like, so if you want to connect to, a one-word hashtag to one hashtag to other people who are talking about something, or a few to connect to a community, that's really effective. But the hashtag cloud it does say I'm desperate, and it does say I do not care about you, current follower.
Yeah, I think
that doesn't stop anybody from using.
Ukraine people love putting a million hashtags everywhere. There's never one hashtag too many. And actually, I think that's a golden rule that those who do it, they should think that that's the wrong message that they're sending out to their followers, that they actually show their neglect, basically, for the people who are following them. There's one more question that sort of segues to this discussion. What works best, classic social media advertising or influencers?
Both.
What's classic?
I think if you have a limited, I mean, Facebook ads are becoming less and less effective, and that means Facebook/Instagram ads are becoming less and less effective and more expensive. So influencers are harder to do, harder to deal with, more steps. But in terms of what you're going to get for your dollar, you're probably going to get a lot more exposure out of influencers, because there's trust that comes with an influencer. When you have a person-to-person relationship, there's trust. When you have an ad, there's less trust, right? Automatically, when you see sponsored, you know that you can't totally trust it. But when you have someone's voice, you already have that trust. And I think that that's not something you can quantify, but it's something that's really important. If you do have the budget, try both, because in all marketing, I talk about how you have to make first contact with people, that people have to hear of your show or decide to follow you, right? Your followers have already made first contact. They know about you, but how are you going to get more people? And we all need more viewers, more awareness. So in building that awareness, any influencers have new followers, ads get to new people. If you do have ads, make sure you make them very, very targeted based on that audience you worked on in the first step.
Well, I have to tell you that when I see an ad, I think that at least that's honest, because I know it's an ad, I know who it's from, and I can even comment underneath, and sometimes they even respond. And when I see just like sort of a regular person talking about something, I'm like, you've been paid for this. I don't believe a word you're saying. And then when I comment, they either become angry or they block me out. And then also you're risking, when you deal with the influencers, we've just had a huge scandal in Ukraine with a bunch of influencers.
Really? Tell me about it.
Yeah, and when you're dealing with them, you're basically risking your own reputation. You basically put your stakes on their reputation. So if they do something wrong, then you're basically connected to their trouble, and you need to somehow say that you don't want to work with them any longer, that was a mistake to work with them in the first place, and you never knew these people. Yeah, we had this scandal just the other day. Ukraine was commemorating the memorial, the day of remembrance of the great famine victims from the 1930s. And this was a solemn event, and people put up candles in their windows because there were millions of people who were starved to death by the Stalin regime. And on that same day, in one of the cities, a group of influencers, they just got together to celebrate one of their birthdays, and they hired like an auditorium or a hall at like the Academy of Ministers Club or something in Lviv, and they had this huge party which they called a hunger party. And when that became known to the public, like all sorts of brands just declared that they don't want to work with these people anymore. And now they're posting videos crying, saying, oh, we're so sorry we did this, we didn't give it a second thought. So sometimes when you work with the influencers, you really, you probably want to work with the ones that actually have a brain.
Well, that's the trusted over time, right? Because what it used to be was that you had gatekeepers who were institutionalists, right? Like channels and networks and newspapers, and these are people that or organizations that had been around for a long time, and they're trusted and they're known. What's happened with social media is you now have these new gatekeepers, these influencers, but they haven't been around very long, and they haven't necessarily learned all the things that you learn. And so there's an attrition process where slowly some of these people will fall away. So when you start working with them, make sure you're really comfortable with this person, particularly about what your brand is, what your show's about. Because if you associate yourself with someone who then goes off and does something really stupid like this, now it brings down your show. It's going to hurt all the things that you worked for. And so it's just something to be really mindful of. And it's still a very tricky new space to navigate.
I would say my biggest advice, my piece of advice on this is when my team chooses influencers, we go back and we look at their profile for quite some time, and we watch them for a while. We watch their stories. We don't just go on their followers. We're really trying to find someone whose values are a fit with what we're talking about. We also have a contract for them, like a legal, like an actual legal contract that they have to sign. But we're not going for people who are famous just for the sake of being famous. We're going for people, even if they're much smaller, who have a value fit with the brand. Another thing that was really interesting, what you were saying about not trusting influencers because they're paid. In the United States, it is, and it's also not, I'll get to this in a second, but for Instagram and Facebook to follow the rules as well, you have to disclose that it's an ad. You have to be transparent. You have to put hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored or hashtag collab, for short for collaboration, or you have to say like, I'm working with this, or, you know, I'm a partner of this company. And people appreciate that, even though, and it is required by the government here, and there have been fines and companies have gotten in trouble, but it's also required by Facebook and Instagram, no matter what country you're in, to disclose who you're working with, right? So it is a Facebook and Instagram rule, but it's also just good morals to be very clear about who you're working with and that you are partnering and that you are transparent about it. Like, we don't need to fool anyone. We don't need to dupe anyone. And you can do it in this way that it was like, oh my God, the person from the show reached out to me and it was so cool. That's transparent. That's excited. And those people, hopefully, when they're that excited about your brand, won't screw you over. If you're just trying to get exposure and piggyback on their fame, those are people who will probably screw you over.
And you also nailed something too, Alex, because you talked about it in your comment, which is it's about authenticity. And even if you're an advertiser, at least you're being authentic. I'm trying to sell something. I'm doing that. I'm clear that's what I'm doing. The number one rule in social media is authenticity. You've got to be authentic. Once you start to look inauthentic, you've lost the plot and you're going to lose people and you lose the trust. All of it starts falling apart.
That's a very good point. And that brings me to a question that I have myself. What are the examples of the wrong usages of the social media in the audiovisual environment? Like, do you know any shows that have done it completely wrong?
I think the worst thing you can do is only put up pre-packaged stuff. So let me, okay, a good example. Hold on, let me.
There's a lot of examples, unfortunately.
There's a lot of examples. So I believe, and I don't put, this is an example I saw a couple months ago. They could have changed it. But I remember for a while that the HBO, and again, they could have changed it. This is maybe like a year ago that I last looked at it. But a year ago, the HBO Instagram account was just like totally packaged promotions. Like, here is a poster basically of the show, and here, go tune in. That doesn't engage me. I don't care. A way better example is Netflix on Instagram, who is posting like memes and jokes and not taking themselves seriously and talking about binge watching and Netflix and chill. And like, they are very self-aware and funny about it and their shows. So the idea is, don't be a wall. Anybody who's being a wall of posters, totally promotional, that's the worst thing you can do, is being boring and being a one-way street.
Yeah, they have a Netflix poster, a billboard in Hollywood on Sunset that changes every week. And literally, like, it's hilarious. They'll have one week where it just says Regina King, and then it says, seriously, that's the whole billboard. Like, it's completely self-referential. It's their own kind of, like, it shows a personality. And even though it's traditional marketing, it's one way, it gets into that sort of authentic, that feeling, and that you're in on the joke, which is something that is really hard to figure out. But that's kind of really the whole trick there, is making sure that you're communicating in that way that feels like people like, yeah, I'm with you. I get it. I enjoy this.
Yeah. One of the measurements that I like using is, would you want to tell someone about it? not even share, but tell, because sharing now is just like, it's a matter of putting your finger on a button right next to this image. But if the next day you actually want to tell someone that you saw it yesterday, then it means that like it really entered your mind that this is something worth sharing. Like it's more than just putting it on your news feed.
That's great. That's a good kind of general rule of thumb.
And we're about to run out of time, but there are still a couple of questions about branding. And Adam and Josh, you have worked with Ukrainian content creators, and you probably know that creating a brand around their shows is not exactly something that's at the top of their agendas. And most teams don't even think about it. Well, if you make a show that's like, I don't know, some of the shows, it's very easy to create a brand around them, but others are very complicated to really think of how they can become a brand. So from your experience, who do you think should really be thinking about turning a show into a brand? Like the script writer, the producer, the director? Should there be a separate person who would be overviewing the whole thing and saying, hey, this is how this will be a brand. Like this is how we will be communicating with our audience. These are the kinds of feelings that we want our audience to experience when they contact with our content.
I would say that oh, go ahead, Josh.
No. I mean, you are the expert. No, I would say it's sort of, and this is strictly from my standpoint as a producer. I think it's really the producer who is sort of the organizer between all the different elements, who needs to kind of be thinking long term, right? Like, like typically the writer tends to be very focused on the writing portion, right? And sort of his tunnel vision in terms of like, all right, what's the rollout? What's the marketing strategy? How do we get people to watch this? I think a director can be very helpful because, they tend to be the creative vision of the project, and they tend to have bigger personalities. They tend to be sort of the ringleader for the creative. So I think it's important to sort of coordinate as a producer, to coordinate with the director, with the actors, and sort of say, look, guys, like, let's get in sync with each other. Let's think about like what we want to sort of roll out. And it's also thinking about like, are there behind the scenes, as we're filming, are there behind the scenes stills or behind the scenes footage that we can capture that, might not necessarily be great marketing tools, but will allow sort of us to pull the curtain back to our audience and say, hey, by the way, this is what happened on this day during lunch, right? And sort of help humanize the elements involved with the show.
Yeah, I agree with that, Josh. The directors and producers and writers are all key in answering that question of why are you doing this? How do you make the lives better, the world a better place? And every property should be able to answer that in some way. It can be harder for certain properties than others, but you hopefully all have a reason for why you're making that particular project beyond just like making money or something like that. There's got to be a reason that something exists, and that's what you get your hooks into to move forward.
And another thing, Alex, is that I've been doing this now in Europe for over 10 years. And when I started going to Europe and talking about these issues, we would get yelled at. All the European filmmakers would be like, we are so above that. We don't waste. How dare you ask us to think about a brand or social media? We are artists. Well, over the years, though, I started getting more and more people to come back and say, well, you know what? Actually, I do care. Because I've made my art film and no one saw it. And then I made my second art film and no one saw that one either. I want people to see my movie. Like you start to really they start to realize that things are changing. And then that's the other part of it. What I've noticed, I think Josh might have had the same experience. So the younger creators that we're working with, they're on social media. This is part of their life anyway. So it's a much more natural instinct for them to be a part of that. Where in some of the more older, let's just be clear, older filmmakers and storytellers, they're not as used to it. Doesn't mean they can't be, doesn't mean they can't figure it out. It's just not something that they're as familiar with. But getting back to that point is what I've seen is over the years, they recognize, look, this is really important. We do have to pay attention to this, and we need to have engaged mentors and people like Lauren who really understand this and to really take them seriously and listen, because this is the new world. This is the world of media right now. You can't, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, you're going to ride a horse, right? On a highway, right? Like, okay, it'll still get you there, but it really isn't what everyone's doing. So it is about sort of kind of looking around and seeing what's happening.
Yeah, these are very good points. Recently, there was an article that came out saying that all of the Ukrainian-made movies that were released in the current year, they did not gather in the box office as much money as just even one Hollywood blockbuster did in Ukraine. So pretty much all of the Ukrainian movies, they flop at the box office, and the only ones that almost break even are comedies. And one of the reasons is probably because for the comedies, it's the easiest to create a brand around them, especially when they become sequels, because people already have a very strong understanding of what it's going to be like. They come see it because they already know what they want to experience by watching it. And it's very easy with a comedy to answer this question, like, why would I spend these 2 hours of my life watching this content? Because the answer is probably just, I want to entertain myself for 2 hours and not think about all other problems that I have in my life. Like, it's an easy one with the comedies. But I think the situation with the Ukrainian film industry shows that that's kind of true, because very often with other genres, creators often think about expressing themselves more than trying to connect with the audience. And this is where the brand is not being created, and this is where the audience probably doesn't get connected.
Mm-hmm. But like, why express yourself if there isn't someone on the other end to connect with that expression, right? And if you want to say something, someone needs to hear it.
Yeah, but there needs to be a connection.
I think, but it goes back to what Lauren said. It's something that famously Steve Jobs said. Your brand is about values. Stop getting confused by words like brand and look at what is the value? What are the values that you are offering and that you are giving? Because even if you're not doing a comedy, if you're doing a very serious melodrama or an intense political thriller or something, that is its own value. It has values. Look at that, right? Like what Lauren said. How am I making the world better? What am I offering to people in any way that changes their life? And that's really where you start with this. That's what they should be thinking about. Don't get lost in all the other, because there's a lot of business around branding. It's the core of it is the values.
That's a very good point. And I hope people who are watching us today will remember it when they submit their applications for Pitchway 4 very soon. This is something that we will all be looking forward to.
A nice tie-in there. That's a good tie-in,
Alex. And thank you very much, Lauren. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Alex.
Josh.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Josh. It was a pleasure.
І дуже дякую всім, хто сьогодні приєднався до нашого.
And thank you everybody who's joined our today's workshop. Please visit the website of pitchua.com, where you can watch not only the video recordings of the previous workshops, they can also be found at our YouTube channel, Pitchua, but also you will be able to find the link for the notes about the previous workshops with all of the useful recommendations. And don't forget that on the 16th of December, we'll announce about the beginning of the next season of the grand competition Pitchua. We'll begin the Pitchua 4. That is why please visit the website, register for this event on the 16th of December, not to miss anything, not to skip it, and to be aware about the topics, the rules, and to hear lots of other useful information from our experts. Thank you so much, everybody. Please share those workshops in your social media. Tell about them to your friends for them to get to know this useful info. Thank you and goodbye.